today to our conversation about jobs in food retail. The Economic Opportunities Program, we advance promising policy, strategies, and ideas to help low and moderate income Americans connect to and thrive in today's changing economy. And in particular, we look at both entrepreneurship and business ownership as an economic opportunity strategy, and we look at access to work and quality jobs as critical to economic opportunity in the United States today. In our Working in America series, we look at the experience of work and how work can be better for working people and can support thriving businesses and communities as well as individuals and families. We're very grateful to the Ford Foundation, to the Prudential Foundation, and to the Walmart Foundation for their support of our Working in America series. So I'm sure many of you had some food last week. And some of you may have had a lot of food last week, if you were like me. And you might have had to run out to your neighborhood grocery store because you forgot the potatoes, or you forgot the onions, or you forgot the sweet potatoes, or all of the above. So today's event, we encourage you to think about the frontline retail workers who shape our experience shopping during the holidays and throughout all of the year. And today's topic was really shaped by our experience managing a program called Reimagine Retail, which we're particularly grateful again to the Walmart Foundation for their support of, and which explores ways to enhance job quality and improve economic mobility for retail workers. And I want to give a special shout out to my colleague, Jenny Weisbord, who has been managing that project. Where is Jenny? There's Jenny. Yes, please do clap for Jenny, and has been really instrumental also in helping put together today's event. I also while I'm giving shout-outs, I want to give a shout-out to my colleague, Corbett Kimmer, who just ran away but will be back, who runs the Institute's food program and was also helpful to us in shaping today's event. And as we've engaged with workforce providers and retail businesses across the country, we've learned that actually grocers are especially eager to learn about and test new training and job quality programs. In this highly competitive industry, many grocers believe that they can gain a competitive advantage really by providing better jobs to their frontline workers, which helps them provide better services to their customers and run a quality business. So today I also want to mention that we're doing an early release of a new publication on the partnership between Pete's Fresh Market, a rapidly growing grocer in Chicago, and a workforce development provider that we've worked with for many years, Instituto del Progreso Latino. And it's part of a new series on promising strategies from our Reimagine Retail Network, and so you can find this profile and resources on the resource table, which I believe is just outside the room. Okay, so I would ask, since we are both live streaming and recording this event, that you please do silence your phones, but please do tweet in today's event. Our hashtag is TalkGoodJobs. And I'm really delighted now that I get to launch our event with remarks from Congressman Dwight Evans. He represents Pennsylvania's 2nd Congressional District. He is currently serving his first term and just won re-election to a second term for the state's new 3rd District. He serves on the Agriculture and Small Business Committees and is co-chair of the Congressional Black Caucus Development and Wealth Creation Task Force. In the House and in his 36 years as a state representative in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives, Representative Evans has focused on expanding access to economic opportunities for Philadelphians. He spearheaded development of the Pennsylvania Fresh Food Financing Initiative, a public-private partnership to finance supermarket development in underserved communities, a critically important issue. This program financed 88 grocery stores and created more than 5,000 jobs in Pennsylvania and became really a national model. So we're just thrilled to have Representative Evans here to spend a few minutes with us, framing today's conversation and offering some perspective on the issue we're talking about today. So Representative Evans, I welcome you to the panel. Thank you again for being with us.
Good afternoon to all of you, and it is absolutely my pleasure to be a part of this discussion, because it couldn't be a more appropriate time with what's going on in that little building not too far from here and what's taking place nationally, because I do believe there's a direct connection between your discussion and your influence that you will have in what takes place. And I couldn't appreciate having this opportunity being here. As you heard, I grew up in a section of Philadelphia which was called North Central Philadelphia. And North Central Philadelphia, for those of you who know, it would be where Temple University is. Basically, that is the section of the city of Philadelphia that I grew up in. And recalling very distinctly, I remember there's an avenue it's called Cecil Moore Avenue now. At the time when I grew up, it was called Columbia Avenue. And I remember seeing a supermarket by the name of Best Market. It was called Best Market. And it was right along Columbia Avenue. And that was the location where everybody went to shop. Stayed in the neighborhood a little while, and then we moved out of that neighborhood and moved up into another neighborhood in Germantown. And recall very distinctly seeing another location called, at that time, it was called Penn Fruit. It was a supermarket called Penn Fruit. So we moved out of that particular neighborhood and saw a place called Shopping Bag. So the common denominator I observed as a kid growing up is that supermarkets were an anchor of a community. It was a location where people would come and shop and gather and people meet up with each other. But it was an anchor of a particular community. And the common denominator, I always ask people, does anybody do not like food? You raise your hand and tell me if you don't like food. Let's see one gentleman, he raised back there. I'm gonna try going without it just for a second or a minute and see how long your existence. So as a kid growing up, seeing that whole element of supermarkets always located in some type of neighborhood. So let's accelerate from when I was a kid to when I was elected to the Pennsylvania legislature. And once elected to the Pennsylvania legislature, the one committee I always wanted to be on was the committee I thought was the committee, and that was the money committee, was the appropriation committee. I was on that particular committee for 28 years, and I was chairman for 20 years. That's the very same committee that Ben Franklin held. There's a little gap between when I held it and Ben Franklin. When Ben Franklin held it, it was called the Ways and Means Committee. When I held it, it was called the Appropriation Committee. So if you understand, if you wanted to drive outcome of public policy, what better way to drive outcome of public policy than to be connected with how things are financed? Because things are financed drives you an outcome to what you want to do and effectuate a particular community. So there was an organization, you're going to hear from this organization come up, a person who's going to speak, Yael, called the Food Trust. And the Food Trust did mapping and was mapping about the insufficiency aspect of food deserts. The fact that what I described to you, when I described to you about those 3 supermarkets in those different neighborhoods that I lived in, Food Trust did a mapping process where they showed there was a disappearance of supermarkets. As a result of the disappearance of the supermarkets, what I don't think we understood then, like I understand now, is that these supermarkets basically is moving to the suburbs. And the only thing that was left in these particular communities tended to be local corner stores, and they do serve a purpose, but it's not the same thing as having healthy choices available to you in terms of having supermarkets available to you. So when I was in the legislature, one of the things I said to a group of members, as members of the Pennsylvania Legislative Black Caucus, is I said, how exactly can we go about affecting a community? So everybody came up with their different ideas and all this stuff. And I said, look, something very basic came to me as a kid. It's called supermarkets. Now, I didn't discover them, but I got an idea for you. So we came up with an initiative at that particular time where we set $30 million aside. $30 million, $10 million for 3 years, and formed an alliance with the Food Trust and formed an alliance with the Reinvestment Fund. The Reinvestment Fund was sort of like the banker of the 30 million. Their task was to form an alliance with the private sector and come up with another 150 40-something million dollars. So it was public money and it was private money. After the Food Trust had done the mapping, basically the reinvestment fund was responsible for the location of these particular supermarkets throughout the Commonwealth. But I want you to understand, my whole motivation was to create jobs. It was not necessarily, I've suddenly become the food champion. I'll talk a little bit about that. But all of a sudden, my whole aspect was, how could we create jobs? What exactly was a way to create jobs? Well, as was just described, we created 100 supermarkets across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and it generated 5,000 jobs. A little bit about Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania has 12 million people, 60-something counties, and Pennsylvania is a rural state. People think of Philadelphia and they think of Pittsburgh, but in between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, it is a rural state. Farming is very important in Pennsylvania. So it was that combination of myself as a person who grew up in urban. One of the first things a member said to me when I came here, he said, "How many farms do you have in the district?" I said, "Wrong question. How many consumers do I have in my district?" There's a direct connection between consumerism and producers. I have the largest Future Farmers of America school in my congressional district. It's called Saul Agricultural School. And most people wouldn't think of Pennsylvania as having that. In other words, that's a pipeline into the system of farming and the needs of farming. So let's think about that. We laid the groundwork with the Pennsylvania Finance. We had Food Trust, we had the Reinvestment Fund, and all of a sudden we had this energy. And the reason I only did it for 3 years is because I wanted to demonstrate to the marketplace. Banks tend not to invest in retailers. I wanted to demonstrate to the marketplace that this is something that could work. Well, in 2008, there's a certain person running for president by the name of Barack Obama. And then there's a first lady who is looking for a niche. And the niche she's looking for is with child nutrition. So where does she come and announce the program, Let's Move? She comes to Philadelphia. Why did she come to Philadelphia? Because we had an initiative, which was the Fresh Food Initiative. They win in 2008. In 2009, we then introduced the idea, a group of us, along with the Food Trust, go to the White House. We present the idea to the White House. Now, we said no pride of authorship. We turned the complete idea over to the White House, and then they piggybacked it on Let's Move. But then they didn't just stop there. They got the policy implemented in the Farm Bill. Congressman Marshall Fudge from Ohio was the one who carried the wood, who's on the Agriculture Committee. At that time, I was still in the state legislature, and I never thought I'd be coming to Washington, D.C. So I come to Washington, D.C., and what committee do I get on? Is the Ag Committee and the Small Business Committee. So I take the same practices that I did at Pennsylvania. And you've heard states are the laboratories of democracy. Well, here was a perfect example. What was taking place in Pennsylvania, we could duplicate the concept throughout the entire United States. But what I also discovered is that food deserts are not just on the domestic side, on the international side. When I was in South Africa, I saw that there's challenges of food deserts across the world. It is not just a problem that is just here in America. Food deserts is a problem all around the world, because what I've said to people, food policy is foreign policy. Food policy is foreign policy. And I said that exactly to Madeleine Albright, because food is one of the things in the toolbox. So when you really think about the direction and where we are, your conversation that you're having, in my view, is a very appropriate time in what's taking place with the Farm Bill and what's taking place in Washington. And what I've said, and I'll sort of close with this, what I think is lacking is people taking real ownership of this issue. I'm not talking about just from a SNAP perspective, but it goes much more than that. Most of those supermarkets, I tell you, they have generally maybe 100, 120, 150 employees. They're entrepreneurship opportunities. They build communities. They anchor communities. If you look at what takes place in a community, I can take you a place where there's a supermarket and then there's a Home Depot. And then from there's a spinoff to retail. Matter of fact, the Food Trust will talk to you about their healthy corners, farmers markets. There's a whole spinoff that is connected to the entire food industry, and it is an asset. When a country has the ability to feed itself, it is in a stronger position. But it also can become a national security issue because the whole question around farming, what takes place with farming, is an issue we don't pay enough attention to. And I don't think in the 2 years I've been here, I think people give lip service to it, but I don't think ownership is there. I don't think it's like in the DNA of the political leadership, Democrat or Republican, in terms of really understanding the value of what asset that we have. I see among a lot of young people, urban farming, organic farming, all of those aspects are there, and all of them offer opportunities to take advantage of it. That's what I've just discovered in 2 years of being here. So I say to you that the conversation you're having, in my view, is very appropriate. We got to push the envelope and not, think traditionally the way we have thought. As I described to you when a gentleman said how many farms I had in the district, and I said, again, that's not the issue. It's how many consumers. And when you really think about it, I don't care what society you have, food is a very important element. Again, I wish you the best in your discussion. I hope you're very bold in your thinking and not fearful to keep pushing all of us who are in the political process, as well as the private sector can play a role. Thank you very much.
Thank you again, Congressman Evans. That was really terrific. Thank you for those remarks. I'm delighted to welcome our panelists to the stage as they are taking their seats. I will do a very brief sort of names to faces introduction of them, but you have their bios and materials in your packet, so please do take a look. We have a terrifically accomplished panel for you today. So to your right, right next to me, we have Seilu Timbo, Director of Diversity at Hy-Vee. Next to Seilu, we have Yael Lehman, President and CEO of the Food Trust. Next to Yael, we have Scott Emmerich, Executive Director, Youth Build Philadelphia Charter School. And next to Scott, we have Claire Babino-Fontenot, CEO of Feeding America. And we're very delighted to have Eric Kessler with us today to moderate today's panel from founder, principal, and senior managing director at Arabella Advisors. So Eric, I turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. And thanks to the Aspen Institute, and thank you, Congressman Evans, for your leadership in Pennsylvania and here on the Ag Committee. Your vote on this farm bill and all the other policies in front of you are so important, and we appreciate you and honor your leadership. What a terrific panel. This is exciting. I was excited by this invitation to be here with you all. These four leaders represent some of the most important voices in our food system right now, obviously with Hy-Vee and one of the most important retailers in the country, but then three of the most far-reaching and impactful nonprofit organizations working in this sector as well. They might be too shy to, so I will encourage you to go to their websites to support their work tomorrow, or today is Giving Tuesday. There might be a match.
Good job.
There might be a donation match on the Feeding America website. I'm sure that in 20 minutes there will be on the Food Trust website. And Scott's
you can do it right on your phone.
Scott's work as well. So let's get that out of the way and say that these folks are real leaders and deserve your support in every way that you can. From my perspective at Arabella, where I spend all my time advising donors and investors on how to have an impact, particularly in the food system, we think about the fact that to have good food, you must have good food jobs, and that's what we're here to talk about. That one of the most important ingredients to a good food system is equity from farm to fork, and that includes equity for the 4.8 million food retail workers, 4.8 million food retail workers. And I can't forget the terrible irony that so many of the workers who grow and package and distribute and sell our food can't afford the food that they grow and package and distribute and sell. And we'll talk about that today and get your perspectives on this. I think a lot of this discussion is driven by some key trends, particularly in this low unemployment environment. We're seeing higher turnover than ever in retail jobs. And of course, and I'm sure that Selu will talk about this, but the need for retailers to incentivize their employees to keep retention in these jobs. And then in this environment, we'll talk a little bit later maybe about some of the online retail environment that's growing. So many customers, I know I do my shopping in physical stores, and I think about that in-store experience. And so much of that in-store experience are the workers at the store. And you want to be greeted by workers that are happy, that are satisfied, that are well-trained, that are engaged. And so we'll talk a little bit about programs that enable that. I keep thinking back to Sam the Butcher. Sam the Butcher? Yep. And everybody that is over 45 just nodded their head because they remember Sam the Butcher from, of course, the famous Butcher and the Brady Bunch, yes. One of the happiest food retailer workers in America. And we need more Sam the Butchers, in my opinion. So we're going to talk about why things aren't as good as they should be, what can make them better, of course, what you all are doing about it. And I'm interested in your personal perspectives. Some of you work in the sector. Each of you work in the sector now, but some of you have prior life experiences that are equally as important as valuable. So let's dig in. And Claire, I'm going to start with you. In many ways because you are perhaps newest to this sector, and I think your fresh perspective, being in the driver's seat at Feeding America now for only a few months, makes your perspective even more valuable. But let's go back to where it all started. I am amazed that you grew up in a family with parents who fostered 100 children. Wow. Is that right?
That's about right.
So I was the third child. I was the baby of three, and I remember fighting for scraps of food with my two older brothers. I don't know where you fell in that 100, but I'm sure there was a fair bit of fighting for food in your family. And now to go from that experience to an organization that serves 4 billion meals a year. Tell me about your sort of personal perspective on this. How did your sort of life experiences get you to where you are today? We'll then spend more time on Feeding America's strategy and where you're going. But tell us sort of where you're coming from on this.
Sure. So I actually want to start with a couple of housekeeping matters, if you'll indulge me. One is, I don't know that retail is what kept a smile on Sam's face. It might have been Alice.
Behind every good butcher.
And the second is, I wanted to tell Maureen, as we were in the green room, I overheard someone talking, and I thought, this food is really a magnet for the conversation today in more ways than one. I heard a gentleman, I really did hear him say this, so I won't look in his direction, say, when I'm thinking about which events to go to, I just check for which one includes food. And voila. So
I didn't say that, but I'll take but I agree with the sentiment.
So to my personal relationship with hunger, it began as I have no memory of not having an awareness of hunger in America. When my mother was pregnant with me in September of 1963, yes, I do tell my age, 53 and counting, yes, 54 and counting, yes. And when she was pregnant with me, she learned that there were 2 children in a neighboring community who were suffering from neglect. And their parents did not have the wherewithal to provide them with the basic essentials of life, including food. So that started something in my mother. She could not turn away from a child in need. So throughout the course of my life, by the time I arrived, I was outnumbered by siblings who had, in fact, confronted hunger. And the whole course of my life, I was able to see it. And there are 108 of us in all. And my mother taught us not to differentiate by biology. So there are 108 of us in all. But what I've found striking is how that experience, because of that experience, I thought I understood hunger because I saw it. What I understood was the impact of hunger on people. And I understood the impact of nourishing food on people. But I did not understand hunger in America. I was operating under lots of misconceptions. And wonderful people like the three who are sitting right on the front row there.
Colleagues from Feeding America.
Colleagues from Feeding America have been helping to disabuse me of some of the notions that I had. And it dawned upon me that if I, a person who had such a unique relationship with hunger, didn't understand what was actually happening in the country, then maybe other people in the country don't understand either. So when we start talking about things like work and hunger, I would never, if you'd asked me before I moved into this role, what are the vast majority of people who are hungry or who are food insecure, describe them. Yeah. I would not have said 68.8% of them are working families. I would never have said that. I would not have spoken to what that really means and the fact that not only do you need a job, right, but that the quality of the work matters fundamentally to your ability to actually sustain your family and to make basic necessities of life, pay for basic necessities of life. I learned things about New York City, which just recently had an analysis come out, and that in New York City, of working families, 40% of working families cannot make ends meet. Let's take DC. According to a study in 2005 in this district, a single parent with one child in preschool and one child in grammar school would only be able to afford 41% of likely her basic needs, be able to pay for 41% of her basic needs based upon a salary of around $20,000 a year. Well, we know that data is dated because we have more recent data from Somerset County over not very far away from here in Maryland that shows same demographics in Somerset, that you need over $70,000 a year in order to take care of basic necessities. So what I'm learning and what I think is, I'm hoping will be helpful to the effort is those types of realizations help me to realize that there are lots of things that I don't understand. Okay. So it's causing me to rethink hunger in ways that I didn't think about it before. And it's also causing me to be a bit more patient with other people who don't understand, because I would have assumed that those who said things that were not accurate, that they were saying those inaccuracies and they knew better. Yeah. I didn't know better. Okay. So now I assume maybe they don't know better. So part of my job is to help them to know better.
Well, thank you and welcome to this movement. We need you, and we're thrilled to have you part of this. Scott, you're sitting alongside representatives from two very well national organizations. Your organization is really a local one in Philly that I suspect some folks here are less familiar with. So tell us a bit about Youth Build Philadelphia Charter School. We heard the Congressman talk about the ag school in Philly. You're in the same neighborhood, but working at a very sort of different end of the training spectrum. So students that come to the charter school, why are they coming and what are they getting out of it?
Sure, yeah, and Youth Build has been part of workforce and leadership development for a long time, 26 years in Philly, 40 years nationally. But it was a bit more recent to food retail over the last 3 years in Philadelphia. So yeah, I think starting with the young people, 18, 19, and 20-year-old, amazing young leaders, all residents of the city of Philadelphia. Yes, we're operating in the same community that Representative Evans described in his opening comments, but we're pulling from 30-plus zip codes across the city. All those young people previously left high school without a diploma. We enroll about 225 young people a year. And I can honestly say that the least interesting thing about them is that they left high school without a diploma. That fact tells you a lot about the systems, education, workforce, oftentimes criminal justice, that they left. It doesn't tell you anything about how brilliant and talented and creative and empathetic and resilient and hardworking the young people are who walk in our doors. So I start there because we'll talk a lot about pathways and appreciate fresh pathways. I think it's really meaningful, but I also believe fundamentally that it's impossible to create a meaningful career pathway with a young person you don't believe in. So the thing I'm most confident about Youth Build Philly is that we believe deeply in the inherent leadership potential of young people. Eric's question was about barriers, so our students certainly do face barriers. I think they're similar to a lot of barriers facing low-income learners across our city and many communities across this country. Chief among those, access to quality health care, childcare, transportation, homelessness, housing insecurity, hunger, food insecurity. In terms of Youth Build's response with students, it's primarily relational, so we do a lot of mentoring work, counseling work. We do a lot of needs-based grants around most of those barriers that I just described. We do a lot of partnerships for referral systems. And on our best days, that work is always with students and not to students and not for students, which practically means that young people have choice and voice and decision-making around how they experience those resources, those supports, leadership roles, both in the academic setting, the vocational setting, and on the service site. All our young people are AmeriCorps members, so students spend half their time in academic setting, half their time in one of 4 career pathways, one of which is directly related to the conversation here today. I'll describe that in a bit. But at the end of either 12 months or 15 months at Youth Build, young people have internalized an ethic of service and see themselves as service providers instead of service recipients. So I'll close with a final 45 seconds because Eric gave us a good reminder to be brief. With Youth Build's 3 core values, which are respect, excellence, and perseverance, because in a lot of ways, I think the why behind what we do is actually more important than the how of how we're actually implementing program. So for us, respect means that we know you as a learner and as a human being, that Youth Build will know you more deeply than any school or any program that you've ever experienced. For excellence, that means that we provide a ton of supports and a lot of opportunities, but the core model is that we're coupling high support with high expectations. So you're leaving our program with a diploma and a vocational certification, one of 4 career pathways, and that diploma and that certification has meaning because we're holding a bar for excellence. And then third and finally, perseverance. And I know that perseverance and grit and resilience have become a bit of a buzzword in education and workforce circles, but I think that's for good reason. It's a critical skill, and we think a little bit differently about perseverance in that we're not actually teaching it, we're activating it. Meaning the young people who come into Youth Build have already demonstrated perseverance in a lot of life systems outside of Youth Build. Our job is to create the conditions and the culture where they can actually demonstrate that perseverance in workforce settings and education settings. So that's us on our best days, with full recognition that it's much easier to climb that space of our best days here in a panel in DC than it is doing the real work every day in North Central Philadelphia, but that's who Youth Build strives to be.
Well, it sounds like a huge return on investment, which is what the donors that I work with look for. So hats off to you and the folks at Youth Build for building this. Taylor, I'm gonna skip over to you. I don't know what the average job length is in a food retail job, how long people typically keep those jobs. I suspect it's less than 18 years, which is how long you've been at Hy-Vee. You were telling me earlier that it was challenging for you to get your first job at Hy-Vee, that they weren't. It
was.
I think
True story.
your youthful energy, let's call it, maybe.
That's a nice way to say it.
Tell us about your journey in the food retail world, 18 years at Hy-Vee from sort of frontline. You've done every job up and down the line.
Actually, 21 now.
21,
18
sorry,
years
you're
full time.
21.
So, I started when I was 2. Honestly, I wanted to work at Hy-Vee. It was kind of the cliche cool thing to do. There's a national restaurant chain right now that is coming out saying that they're everyone's best first job. Yeah, I'm not going to say their name. That's okay. That's the way we feel about the first job. You know, when I was coming through Hy-Vee, it was kind of like, it's your first job. You start, you're a bagger, what have you. I wanted to work there, but I didn't. I applied, never got hired, which was fine. I ended up having some other jobs, and a couple of my best friends and I went and applied to another store. I still didn't get hired. This is another store up the street from where I lived, and my dad went in there every single day for a solid month and bugged him. Hey, do you have a job for my boy? He's only working 3 hours a day. He needs more work. He's kind of lazy. He needs more work. He needs to be working. So they finally hired me. I think it was more to get him to be quiet and leave me alone. Probably not thinking I was going to last for a long time. But the thing is that, you know, I look around and I'm still here, and it's kind of one of those fun things where you pinch yourself because, you know, you didn't really go there. I didn't really go there looking for a career. I looked for a job my last year of senior football and sports. Knew I was going to the University of Iowa at the time. Maybe could have a part-time job on the side, but I ended up falling in love with the place and falling in love with food, you know, and people. The two biggest, parts of the job that everyone seems to love is food and people. And connecting those two in a building at a place I got paid to do. I got paid to talk to people and make food. I mean, it was just a good fit for me. Really, as you continue to progress in your career and you have someone say, hey, you should think of Hy-Vee as a career. Why do I want to do that? I'm supposed to go work with Bill Gates. I'm a computer science major, right? Sit and design computers. That's what I want to do. Didn't have the patience for that. But I did have patience to make sure everyone who came through the front doors was taken care of. And made sure everyone else who worked with me was, you know, enjoying their workspace. So I went full-time at 19. It was a year I took off from college. Didn't really know what I wanted to do. Wanted to make sure I took the time to think it through. Ended up going full-time and then going back to school full-time. So I kind of did both and burned the candle for a few years. But I have a degree in African American World Studies and also an entrepreneurship certificate and business minor. So I was able to learn in the classroom and then practice at work some of the, you know, the business principles and all that when it came to the actual business aspect of it. I mean, frankly, it's really simple. You put items out for sale and you sell them, right? And you take care of people and you make sure that's enjoyable. So got to spend time running stores, which being a store director, especially for our company, is a very unique, very proud role that you can hold. And, you know, as you hold that role, you have the opportunity to influence not only just your employees, but the communities you serve, your business partners. I mean, I'm just sitting with this panel here, knowing that we work with Feeding America on many different levels. We like to work with the youth in our communities, speaking to youth, connect them, because that's our future work pipeline. Our future connection, also their customers, we want to take care of them, and the happy community. So I was fortunate enough to run stores for about 10 years, 4 different stores for 10 years, and each and every one of those stores was different. And I think it's important to say that because we were taught to run our stores very autonomous, and every single one of those stores and those communities had different needs. Some of them maybe were socioeconomically challenged stores. Some of them are maybe close to a food desert. Frankly, I ran a store that was considered a mile away or 2 miles away from what would be considered a food desert. And so we had, how do we get food to that area? You know, so the delivery model, frankly, and we do it now, but the delivery model started when we got to make that decision in the store. How do we take care of this community? So, you know, being able to think like a businessman without all the financial risk was really the caveat. It was the kind of the icing on the cake of having a career with Hy-Vee. In our company, if you look around, if you see the name tags of our employees, everyone from cashiers to the bakers to the meat cutters you see 20 years of service, 30 years of service, 40 years of service, 50 years of service. I mean, we have had folks that, again, started when they're 2. And now they're 52, and they're still working, you know, still working for the company. And that's a lot of it goes back to just being able to have fun. So when the CEO asked me to come in this role, where I'm helping them focus on our diversity and inclusion journey, and also focusing on making connections in our communities and areas where we haven't done the best job and need to be better, I said this is a no-brainer. I mean, I get to go out and again and talk to people and get paid to do it, so it's pretty fun. So. With that, I'm here. You know, don't know if I answer all your question, but
We've got more time. We're going to come back to you because you know, Hy-Vee. Well, first, we're fortunate. Hy-Vee's fortunate to have you, and we're all fortunate to have Hy-Vee because they're really one of the leaders in workforce development and retention and good food jobs. So so thanks for being here. Yael, I want to sort of dig into the substance of workforce development and economic development in the food sector. Of course, the Food Trust is truly one of the real leaders and innovators in this sector for years, having thought about new approaches to hunger and food access and economic mobility. Tell us how the Food Trust sort of understands the role of grocery stores and sort of bricks and mortar retail operations in workforce development and economic development in the communities that you work in.
Sure. Well, I think it was great to have Congressman Evans here earlier today. We've worked with him for almost 20 years, I think, at this point. But I mean, when he was talking earlier today, I was flashing back to, by the way, I used to be so scared of him. 20 years ago, I'm happy to say my age too, so I'm 50, so I'm 30 years old, and he was the head of the Appropriations Committee for the state of Pennsylvania. This is the most powerful guy in the state, you know. And I still remember when I first being in the meetings with him, physically shaking. But it's been a wonderful experience working with him over the many years. And but I remember in the early days him saying to me and others that a lot of lower income communities they are under-resourced in a variety of ways. And any community needs a decent bank. You know, people in your community need a place to access quality health care, decent education, transportation is oftentimes challenging, and food is also a piece of this as well. In a lot of lower income areas, you can't find high quality food retail. And also it's tough to find a quality job. But the lack, like we were talking about how we had done the mapping earlier, showing that areas that had a lack of healthy food retail, of grocery stores, also had higher rates of diet-related death and disease. And but in addition to this, we also see that lost commercial vitality. This makes the communities less livable. The local economies are not thriving. So the thing about the Food Trust is we came at this from a public health perspective and a social justice perspective, saying we believe that all people have a right to affordable and healthy food. It's not okay that you don't have a decent place to go shopping in your neighborhood. But what was interesting also, as we talked to not just policymakers, but folks in the neighborhood as well, was this piece around the grocery store, as Congressman Evans brought up, as the economic anchor. And that when you have a quality grocery store in the neighborhood, and you know this, other retail stores open up around you, and it has this wonderful ripple effect of creating jobs in the neighborhood and local jobs. So I don't know, you know these statistics better than me, but different grocers we've talked to said, for example, if you open up a big grocery store, it's about 24 jobs per 10,000 square feet or something like that. So if you open up a big grocery store, you can create as many as like 150 to 200 jobs. And that's exciting stuff. And I've personally been to a ton of grocery store openings throughout the country, you know, not just in Pennsylvania, but throughout the country. And you know, you would think maybe it's not such a big deal, but if your neighborhood hasn't had a grocery store, you know, when I'm at the ribbon cuttings, it's amazing to actually, I'm not kidding, people actually have tears in their eyes saying, thank you for bringing the store to the neighborhood. This is going to change my life. I mean, it sounds like I'm over the top. This is exactly what people are saying, though, and it's a very cool moment. You know, in New Orleans, there are like big parades. The mayor comes out, and it's not just, it's because, and that enthusiasm is real. That's like, this is something that, like I said, I've personally experienced, and it's very exciting.
Yeah. Say, let me come back to you. So 21 years, and you're talking about the folks with the 30-year and 40-year ribbons. What's the secret sauce? What is Hy-Vee doing that is keeping folks in these jobs, that's making them proud of their jobs, that's sort of creating a good food workforce? What are the sort of top 2 or 3 things that all are?
And thanks for saying top 2 or 3, because I can rattle off probably 100 right now. I really, things, you know, I think for one, and maybe it's part of Midwest thing, you know, I'd say the biggest thing is our ownership model. We're a 100% employee-owned company. So really, we look at that.
Are there other big retailers that are employee-owned?
Not that I can think of.
I didn't mean to cut off the applause.
No, thank you. Not that I can think of most of them. I know there's some other companies. I know like United Airlines is an
Yeah, of
employee-owned
course.
company.
But in the food retail space,
Yeah,
you guys
so with that, the unique ownership model with us, we'd say, the number one thing you got to do is take care of home, right? Just like if you own a home, you own it, you want to take care of it. Take care of your building, take care of your customers that pay your paycheck every single day, take care of your other employees. You're a stockholder. You get stock in the company. Some of us get to buy it direct, some through the 401k program. We share our profits across, which becomes also a pride thing and a competitive aspect, which is good. And then also, the duty, again, I'll reiterate the duty to make sure that everyone who comes through your doors is treated like gold. Those are the things that the ownership model create. Along with that, again, our stores are autonomous. Every single store gets to run like it's its own building. As a matter of fact, when we ran a store, and when I'm out recruiting, what I do is say, hey, when Hy-Vee picked me, they basically said, here's $20 million, go run a store. Call me if you need help. Call us if you need help. We have your back. Go make money for the company and make money for yourself. That's how we run. So if you want to really think about the uniqueness of that kind of model, everyone has a buy-in. And those who don't see it, maybe they don't stick around, but they have the buy-in. And we focus on 5 major fundamentals to get us there: helpful, friendly, honest, respectful, and dedicated. And if you follow those 5 things, and again, going back to like people and you like food, it's just a natural fit for enjoying what you do. And that's how you take it from a job to career. Again, I wanted to work with Bill Gates, or I wanted to play football. I knew that wasn't gonna happen at an early age, right? So what am I going to do that's fun? Maybe give me a little of that competitive spirit, enjoy what I do. Yeah, work hard and be rewarded for it, either financially or just, enjoying what you do and get that warm and fuzzy feeling when you go to work every day, not really sitting in the office. So those are the things I think really keep us to it. And then spending the time with a lot of the youth and also the people who are at a disadvantage and really showing them the opportunity, being able to relate with them, will continue to perpetuate.
So Scott, you're training the future Hy-Vee workers. You guys work with ShopRite, and you're providing the employees for these workplaces. What, in your perspective, makes for one a sort of well-trained employee, and how are you working with the retailers to keep these folks engaged and happy and sort of well employed?
Yeah, and I think Silo's description of thinking about the difference between a job versus a career pathway, both with employers and on the training end for how we're helping young people think about that, is super useful. ShopRite has been a great partner for us in Philadelphia since 2016. So just kind of our training model has evolved a bit. So the build and youth build has traditionally been construction building trades, which we and all 270 youth build programs in the US and 21 countries offer. But then kind of based on local labor market demand, we're able to expand into additional career pathways. So healthcare, childcare, and then for us, 3 years ago, this business administration customer service excellence training. That Starbucks initially seeded with a grant for us to do barista food service training. And then we're super fortunate to get matched up with ShopRite, which initially launched a partnership that was focused on a relatively straightforward goal, but a lot of complexity in doing it, of providing youth build students and alumni with a retail experience and a mentor, which has been hugely important to support a successful transition into their workforce. And ShopRite was specifically interested in youth build alumni working in their bakeries. And the pathway is initially a customer service associate job with an opportunity to become a pastry chef. So we have a handful of students and alumni and growing quickly in this pathway. And I think importantly, the ShopRite HR personnel have been extremely communicative, both with staff and with alumni and from the entire hiring process to the onboarding process. We're fortunate as a workforce agency, and not every agency has this resource, that we have full-time staff who are matched with graduates for a year after they leave as they're transitioning into college and careers. And so they're doing mentoring, they're doing action planning, but we also need employer partners who are willing to pick up the phone and have conversations and show up with us and our young people and tell the story of what's going well, what's not going well, what's in between in terms of how our alumni are doing. Not every employer does that. ShopRite consistently shows up for those conversations. As an example, in the first kind of mental toughness orientation that we start our program year with, as young people are transitioning back into school and work, having not been in those pathways for a while, we do a college and career expo day, and ShopRite leadership shows up at those days and describes what the pathway is, what the job opportunity. Showing up in those spaces is hugely important, and makes a big difference when you have employer partners committed to do it.
So Claire, part of your, I suppose a big part of your job is to launch and implement a new strategy for Feeding America, focused on sort of looking ahead to 2025.
Yes.
I know there's lots of facets to it, and I'm sure we'll be able to learn all about it online and watching this space moving forward. But what parts of the strategy, when we think of Feeding America, we think of feeding. We're here to talk about jobs. How does Feeding America's programs interrelate with job security and workforce development? Because we know it's all interrelated, and I'm not sure folks know you all in that light, but it's so critical.
Yeah. So let me start by just a very high level understanding of what the pillars are and the quick migration to those pillars. As an organization, we've existed for decades and emerged out of a need that one man saw to feed people that he thought was temporary. Our founder, I believe, would be disappointed by our current existence because he would have preferred that we not be necessary. And yet we are. And we fed approximately 47 million Americans last year, around 4 billion meals, as you mentioned. And one of the things that's happened naturally that we took the time to actually memorialize, and now we're working to institutionalize, is that as people in our network saw hungry people, they had this irresistible urge to not only feed them, but to help them to not need to be fed by us in the future. So underlying our 2025 strategy is an expectation of ourselves and an understanding of the moment. So an understanding that we are uniquely able to do more, and a commitment to help to empower people so that they have food security on a going forward basis. That is a space for a definite intersection. There's so much data, and I was in finance in the past, and one of the reasons that I was drawn to finance is I use this colloquial expression often used in my hometown, which is math don't lie, right? And math really
There's
doesn't.
some fuzzy math in DC right now, but that's
No, well, first you have to define math. That's not math.
fair enough.
Math does not lie. Math is remarkably consistent in that it does not lie. So when you look at the data, you see this opportunity to make a meaningful impact. And I also stop and I reflect on the fact that if I think about myself as a discrete human being, and think about the fact that in this country, a person who was born to my grandparents on both sides were sharecroppers. Neither of my parents graduated from high school. I became an executive vice president at Fortune 1, and I'm the CEO at Feeding America. A country that can do that can solve hunger. A country that throws away 72 billion pounds of perfectly edible food every year can solve hunger. And in solving hunger, we actually solve so many of the other issues here. People who suffer from food insecurity come to work less able to perform. So one of the things that I'm excited by, I talked about it before, I like math because it doesn't lie when you don't shade numbers. If you use the right numbers and you add, subtract, it does the same thing every time. But the other thing is that everybody should want to do it. This is one of those, there's a cliche win-win. This is a win-win situation. Businesses should want to embrace this movement because it will enhance productivity for businesses. Humans should want this movement generally because it will enhance the quality of life and the longevity of other human beings in this country. It's something we can be so proud of, and I'm confident that we're going to make precipitous progress. So inside of the food our system, having seen some of that, we started long ago before we had a strategy that said it. We had people who had workforce development programs inside of food banks, and in pantries. So now what we're doing is we're focusing on it. And another finance one is we know that you move what you measure. So we're measuring it. We're putting out big goals, but attainable goals. And we're going to measure ourselves against those big goals, and we're going to make precipitous progress. We're going to achieve those goals.
Thank you for that. And I want to encourage folks to think about questions they might have and jot them down. We'll come to those in a minute. And for folks that are watching online, you can tweet your questions using the hashtag #TalkGoodJobs, and we'll come to those in just a minute. Yael, first, I've never heard anyone describe a hobby of going to an opening and watching grocery store openings, so that's impressive.
I would share that.
I have a weird life.
Well, it's your job. This sounds like a preoccupation. I'm not sure. But so you at Food Trust, you've seen so many different retail models and so many different sort of grocery models in different geographies, serving different communities. And what from a jobs perspective, what models are working? I mean, it's a and full disclosure, I'm an investor in an online retailer in the food sector. But what's working? What's providing jobs? What's satisfying sort of consumer demand and workforce development?
So, yeah, no, good question. I think that some retailers are doing it better than others, and I just want to first acknowledge that we need to do better, and we need to ensure that food retail jobs provide a living wage for people. It was brought up earlier, a lot of folks that are working aren't making enough to make it through the month and feed themselves, and that's not acceptable. And if we're going to help to bring a grocery store to a community, we need to make sure that the jobs provided are good enough jobs that folks can afford to feed their own families. Otherwise, we're not making the progress we need to towards solving the problem of food insecurity and hunger. But yes, there's some good examples out there. So. And it was brought up earlier. Brown's ShopRite is one example in Philadelphia. They have a job training program for returning citizens, and it's a 6. Maybe you know the details better than I do. It's like a 6-week training thing, and they have social workers there, and it's a guaranteed job at the end of it. So one nice thing about food retail is it can be a stepping stone into a job where maybe it would be tough for you to get hired. And also, you can move up the ladder in a lot of these grocery store jobs, which is cool also. So you might start as a bagger, but potentially there's a ladder to be able to work up and make better money. Some of the grocery stores are unionized and have pretty good benefits, but not all of them. There's a good example in Detroit. There's some really great independently owned examples as well as chain examples, but there's a lot of really cool family-owned grocery stores. There's a fund in Michigan created by the Fair Food Network called the Michigan Good Food Fund, and kind of modeled off of these fresh food financing initiative kind of models. And they funded a grocery store called the Imperial Food Market in Detroit. And it's these 5 brothers, I think, if I remember correctly. They're doing so great. They just hired another 50 folks. But there's some good examples out there nationally, and I'm happy to. There's also a ton of these different stories on our website that I am going to plug, healthyfoodaccess.org.
Good. So one last question before we open it up to our friends here. The retail model is evolving, and online is an increasing part of the consumer retail experience. From each of your perspective, I'm curious. Does it matter? Do you think about it? Is it upending things? How does it impact, in your opinion, sort of jobs and wages and workforce development? Is it a competitive threat? Is it providing new opportunities? How do you train people to not work at ShopRite, but to work at some online place? knowing that Feeding America relies on partnerships with many retailers, how does this all come into play? So the role of online, just some quick thoughts before we turn to the audience.
I had the I don't know what you'd call it, a dubious distinction of being a part of a strategic team that was looking at the impact of online on retail.
This was in your Walmart days?
In my Walmart days.
Yeah.
I was in finance there, and Walmart would admit that it was very late to the game. Amazon was a small bookseller at one time. Does anybody remember that Amazon used to be a small bookseller? And the kinds of things, and I would say, as you were going through that list of what do you think it is, I would say all of the above. So is it a threat? Yes. Is it an opportunity? Absolutely. Right? And what I'd love to hear from others as well, and it informs looking at what we're doing, it's a similar scenario, which is what impact technology is having on the universe. And it is having significant impacts on the way that we live our lives and what we expect as well. So when I heard the comments earlier from all of you, actually, what felt good about those comments in particular for me was understanding. I heard a great presentation about technology that said that we often, as humans, we've made mistakes around how we even think about technology. And we've asked, what is it that computers can't do, right? And every time we've had the list, we've been wrong. Computers will never be able to beat a world master at chess. I think that happened. Yeah,
A little while ago.
it happened a while back, right? So whatever we put on the list. And they said we need to pivot from that to what are humans built to do, right? And that human contact, that the things that you talked about that often people associate with their local grocer, and that provides a disadvantage for larger retailers if they don't have that. The secret sauce of retail, and the reason that I would think brick and mortar can be vibrant and vital in an ecosystem of retail would be if there's a human touch that you get and that you want when you walk in the room. The warmth of a human smile actually triggers some stuff inside of your brain that a computer cannot trigger inside of your brain. So I think that that's part of the key, is really understanding technology, recognizing it's not leaving, it's only accelerating what it can do, and then thinking about being human-centered in what we do. And if we had the chance, and maybe I'll plan a question for, there's a stigma attached to poverty in this country that's reprehensible, right? And part of what we are uniquely able to do at Feeding America that technology won't do is treat people with dignity and respect, connect to human beings who are going through something difficult in their lives. That's something that the machine won't, and that we will, and that so many people do inside of our network every day.
Tweet me your answers. Just quick answers on how online is impacting you or how you're impacting it.
Yeah, I mean, I think the evolution of work, and this goes beyond technology, that any workforce agency that doesn't evolve to change with the needs of students and the needs of the workforce isn't worth much. So I think any curriculum that we develop has a combination of kind of technical training skills that I think looks different for online than it does for bricks and mortar, but it also has a set of foundational skills that people used to call soft skills, but I think that kind of undersells the significance, and that's broadly transferable. But agree with Claire's point that there's a human-centered element to this, and if we move what we measure, that there's a quality job definition that has to apply equally to online as it does bricks and mortar. So just a real quick shout out to Generation Work, which Aspen and Reimagine Retail have been supportive of. And in Philly, we've been part of a collaborative that's kind of defined what a quality job definition is. And there's 4 factors around dependability, 2 around opportunity, 1 around choice points for individual workers. And that definition, if we're being human-centered, has to apply equally, and not just within food retail, but broadly across the sector and others.
Absolutely agree.
Yeah, if I'm just going to tweet, I'll just back that by saying.
Just retweet.
I'll retweet. Exactly, I'm retweeting, but no, if it's going
Hashtag what he
to
said.
be, same for online retail jobs, they have to be quality jobs, and people have to be able to afford to live and feed their families, whether it's a retail job that's brick and mortar or online. We have to make sure these are quality jobs.
Tweet, hashtag, whatever. I don't do much tweeting. Exactly what Claire said. Couldn't agree with it more. To add with that, you know, you can look reality in the eye and deny it. Because if you read the book by Steve Case, The Third Wave, if you haven't read it yet or heard about it, it really talks about where we are. I mean, I remember the days before the internet. Some of you, I'm dating myself, the gray hair has died. It's not gray. But things are changing so fast, we have to move with it. And that's really more the narrative right now. It should be, got to stay up with the wave versus wondering and twiddling your thumbs about, oh my gosh, we're behind. You know, get ahead of it and enjoy it and be involved with it. So I think we're doing that too right now. Food grocery, my wife orders foods online. I go to the gas station because I'm time starved. I never really go to the grocery store very often. I mean, so building different lifestyles.
Yeah, good. We've got a room full of folks and a whole list of folks online that are engaged in these issues and have questions for you all. So raise your hand if you have one, and I'll reach out. Go ahead. There's a microphone coming to you. So, and the
you.
briefer your question, the more complete answers. we'll be
Okay,
able
I'll try to
give.
be brief. So for the grocery industry, what are ways, we know that grocers are competitive. So rather than trying to force, grocers to share data or, do more around providing good jobs, what can we incentivize for grocery stores to either share data about, the types of jobs that are in their stores or ways that they are doing better? How can we create, this culture that it's, a promising thing that all grocery retailers want to do so that we know that their employees are having good jobs?
So is it more based on like employee data or like job descriptions? What are you asking for? Or like financials?
I guess which things do you think would be most effective
Well,
in ensuring
I
that
should
there are
always tell
more?
people this, and I know Claire and you guys probably know this, that the grocery industry averages 1% net profit. So
Right.
1 penny on every dollar is taken to the bank. So that's always knowing that going in, because if you come in with a strategy, you want to make sure you design it around understanding that there's not much room for error at all, right? And so that, you talk about prices, you're like, oh, that's high. Well, there's a reason for that, maybe. So I'd say that it's more about, I think, the equity of what you can offer the employee. What the prospective employee could be, whatever community aspects go along with that to design in order to just really connect with everybody. Like I tell people when I hire your kid at 16 that I promise you that they'll be ready to enter the workforce before they even finish. So I focus more on those types of things versus for one, we can't share financials because we're private. So that's never really part of the equation. But I focus on more what opportunities we can help them with to continue with their future.
But if we thought that when people think they have a common enemy, they're more inclined to come together. And I think as long as there's an incentive, a monetary incentive, to not be transparent about things, then there's not likely to be transparency. But where I think you might get access to data would be if a trade organization and its constituency thought, well, because of what's happening with online, we don't have enough people who are coming into the workforce. We need, as a collective, to go and get this talent. We're in a war for talent. Then I think you might get more transparency through those trade associations as vehicles versus private organizations choose to be private for a lot of reasons, but one of them is because they get to be private.
It does seem like there's in that vein, there's what I would call sort of pre-competitive areas that might be ripe for collaboration between otherwise competitors and public disclosures. In our role in helping the Rockefeller Foundation thinking about their work on food waste reduction, that's an area where retailers aren't competing on the amount of food that they waste,
Exactly.
or food that is wasted in the retailer environment, and that seems like a place where an industry challenge could come together with data, with sort of visibility on data, and sort of pre-competitive, easier than it sounds, I'm sure. Yes, sir. think there's a microphone. There you go.
Thanks, everybody. I'm Carl Polzar. I do a lot of research and advocacy on financial inclusion of people in the bottom half of the spectrum. And I'm wondering about paid sick days. So I've just got an article coming out in the Health Affairs blog about, I was concerned about personal care workers, people that handle patients, daycare workers, and now I just Googled food retail workers are low wage, and a good chunk of them don't have paid sick days, so they can transmit disease. They have a huge incentive to come to work sick. I mean, I'm promoting at least 4 days a year, and that would mean you'd have to set aside 2% of your payroll and have a plan for backup, which seems like if you're in that business, you ought to have anyhow. Is that something that makes sense? I mean, and most of I think since about 30 to 40% of the people don't have it, it means that most of the employers are providing it, but some are not. So do we need a federal standard? Would it make sense? Would it bankrupt some of these food retailers?
So paid family and medical.
Family leave's a lot more expensive. Sick. You're sick.
Paid sick leave, I'm also interested in broader sort of paid leave for employees' needs, but sick in particular, how does it play in the retail environment?
Well, I think it's important. I think it's totally important to have something that, just a level of insurance. Unfortunately, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of employees who don't. I can think of our own stores when it comes to what we call flex time. So you can use it for sick, you can use it for vacation or whatever it is, something that comes up. You can use it about an hour at a time, right? If you need to go to the doctor, you can have 2 hours to go to the doctor if you need. That's more for our full and regular time employees, not necessarily for part-time employees. Those are probably the ones who may not be able to afford not to come to work when they are sick or their child is sick. And I think that's something that we brought up. We're going through and focusing on our benefit and fringe benefit modernization and how do we continue to attract folks, right? In a 50% turnover industry or more, we want to lower that as much as possible. And so those are the things we're looking at. I think you're absolutely right. You got to find a way to set funds aside. I think naturally the turnover may go down. How many employees lose their job because they missed that one last day of work and had no coverage, right? And just, the experience that comes with that and then the whatever goes from there. So you start lose less turnover. We say $6,000 a head every time we turn somebody over. It's going to pay for itself if you really think about it. So I know it's something that's very important to us and it's on our table now. In my position now, I get to have a little bit of a voice in that too. So.
And we know from our data that the inability to take sick leave has a direct impact on whether or not you're going to be food secure.
Scott is here. Oh, I'm sorry, Claire.
No, I was just speaking to that.
Yeah, I think, my colleagues on the panel know the sector response on this better. I know from the perspective of young people, when we worked on this quality job definition with the Generation Work, the Casey Foundation folks, that the young people saying of the 4 dependability criteria, the access to benefits was top on the list, and that was most focused on paid time off and healthcare. And in some ways, we thought that the family sustaining wage would kind of be number 1 on the list of young people, and it certainly mattered, but it's necessary and it's not sufficient. There's a lot of young people who are saying it's more about the conditions of work. Do I have a manager who cares about me? Do I have access to benefits? So I think from the perspective of young people in the pipeline, it matters a ton.
Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Oh, sorry. Hi.
Thank you for having this incredible panel today, and blushing a little bit with all of the great energy and folks sort of in my arena. My name's Elijah Joy. I work at Bread for the City in their Sustainable Agriculture and Foodways program. I started doing healthy living, farm to table, which we now call seed to block focus, which is dealing with food insecurity in Washington in a variety of ways through our food pantry, which has been going on longer than our program, but our program was focused more on direct service, which it still has a direct service aspect, but since I've come in, I've done a lot of healthy living classes, and equity in the food space is a security issue for me as far as on the retail side as a chef. I don't have a restaurant. I don't have retail. I've done pop-ups since before they were even called pop-ups. I learned from people who came before me who did this work. I do plant-based cooking exclusively, very soulful cuisine, and come from a long line of folks in this region who've done this work. And since the outburst of the changes in the city, Whole Foods, once seen as like a gem, is sort of almost a curse right now, and to certain people, and there's a sort of boxing out of very quality people, including myself, who are very capable of handling food security issues. On our own, for our own community here. I'm thankful that I work in a space now at Bread for the City that's giving me the leverage and the sort of autonomy to sort of forge into a new way. We've been doing some cooperative education and hosting the cooperative stakeholders here in Washington at our center, and a Co-op 101 session, which is then spun into a little working Co-op 101, which we have some really interesting partners, some in this room, at Martha's Table. They're letting us use their commercial kitchen, and we're doing our training. And we've launched something called Sweet Potato Fam, is a little co-op incubator of sorts. We're not a full-on co-op, but we're working with the principles, democratic principles. So really, I want to see. I was more interested in hearing what Ms. Babineau had to say as far as Feeding America and some of the newer areas you're moving into, and entrepreneurial training, and really because what we're doing is showing people how to take food right to the market. So we're in 4 restaurants, going to be 5 this week, and anybody in the room want some sweet potato pies? And we grew these sweet potatoes at our partnership farm partner at UDC, Land Grant University here, and they are certified, USD certified. And we have also launched a few original products. Right now we have the new Japanese white sweet potato pie.
Do you have a question for the panel?
I do. I'm just like, holla at me, but I want to hear, where this is going. I kind of feel alone a lot in this work, and I want to see where people are with this a little bit more.
So what are the connections that we can make between all the different levels of work going on? Because there's so much great grassroots work happening as well.
And it's one of the things that's unique about Feeding America, and I will once again say, today, of all days, go out and donate to Feeding America, because our network is so wide that it not only includes our headquarters work that we do, then over 200 food banks, but we help to support over 60,000 food pantries and soup kitchens around the United States. And I want to know more about yours, and I have people in the room who are local to DC, so we'll make sure that we get the name of what you're doing. And what we're finding about, one of the great things about having such a vast network is that great ideas come from all types of directions, some of it from bottom up, some from the middle down and up, some from the top down. And we're highly receptive. We just want, we're desperate to win this battle. And we're looking for partners who can help us to do it. And we've found innovation in remarkable places. So I'd love to hear more, and we'll follow up and try to understand what you're doing. Thank you.
Let me introduce Ona, the head of the DC Food Policy Council, and the food policy director for the mayor and the District of Columbia. I'm honored to be on Ona's Food Policy Council. Ona?
Thanks for the intro, Eric. So, as Eric said, I work for the city, and DC is really interested in spurring new grocery development, particularly in our neighborhoods with low grocery access. And to be honest with you, it hasn't gone that well. We have tax incentives for grocery stores. Since those tax incentives have existed, we actually lost a grocery store in a low-income part of the city, and we didn't gain any. I think as we're looking at what local government can do, I'd be interested in hearing from your perspectives, like how do you encourage and convince retail to go into neighborhoods that don't meet their typical metrics or demographics of what they're looking for? Like I heard a grocery retail at one point say, we look at
pretty exclusively how many college degrees are in the, the several blocks around where we're going to locate, which seems like a really bad measure of who needs food and is willing to pay for food. So I'm curious, how do you be more convincing? Where do you see the role of local government in working with retailers and investors?
Well, I can tell you that that's always a debate all the time in rooms. And it's good to have healthy conversations because sometimes you look at a location, say financially, do it at cost of land, right? How many rooftops, whatever it could be. It doesn't make sense to build a store here. But then there's the other side of it that says, if you look at the data, but then you have the gut feeling, hey, we need a store here, right? We need to support this community. You talk about the hub if you want to continue to really just spark growth and spark, everyone looking to move up in a community. I've ran stores in that community. Matter of fact, talk about a store opening 2 weeks ago. One of my old stores that I ran, just in June, was flooded. Got flooded by some really bad rains in Des Moines and was closed up until 2 weeks ago. And it's been totally gutted and redone. And this was a store 10 years ago. I remember coming up through the ranks hearing about we were going to close it and move it out to a more suburban area. And it was a big deal. And we ended up leaving the store there. To see people cry because that store's there, we know it's not going to turn a profit in 3 months. We know it's not going to turn a profit in 1 year, 2 years. I know the financials and I remember seeing them. It's not going to turn for a while. But the hub for the community and the community outreach you can't measure that. It's important. It's not going to bankrupt us. And we know it's going to continue to drive business to either all of our other locations or just that as a whole. And together, we hope that we can partner with, if it's community leaders or if it can just be the hub for folks to come in and hang out on Sunday after church or whatever it is. We know that's important for that neighborhood. And it's going to help our brand in the long run, period. So.
Now, if it doesn't ink, it tends not to happen. That's the reality, right?
If
it doesn't ink, if you can't see a path to profitability, it tends not to happen. However, I will tell you, I saw Magic Johnson. He is defying so many stereotypes about what will ink and let me stop you. What will be profitable and what won't be profitable in urban centers. And I just heard him speak last week, I think it was, or the week before last, and he makes a compelling case, and I encourage you to understand, because I want to understand better too, what exactly is it that he's done? Because he's been told you can't build a movie theater on Crenshaw. You'll never make money. And then he builds it, and it's one of the top producers. Starbucks, nope. People in low-income communities will not pay $3 for a cup of coffee. Yes, they do. He's got very highly profitable Starbucks. But there must be an ecosystem that has to be created. I don't understand the financials behind it yet, but I encourage us to be thinking about what's happening there, because he's figured something out, and he's actually rolling it out across urban centers in a lot of different types of places, and I'll bet it can work with food too. So I want to understand it, and if you figure it out before me, call me. Okay.
Scott, last minute on how to really make it work.
Yeah, and I think this is somewhat related but broader than store locations, just to remind us of how racial equity and inclusion agenda is represented in the pipeline strategy we're discussing. So in the city of Philadelphia, and Generation Work is trying to have a racial equity and inclusion conversation. And one of our partners recently did a focus group with students, and one of our graduates was saying, Youth Build prepared me for the job and the technical skills. You did not prepare me for the racism that I would experience in the workforce. Mm-hmm. And that is not unique to food retail. That is unique to America and the society we live in. But if we're not having real conversations about race and racism, and we have employer partners where we've had really difficult conversations with the social identity work group that we run out of our school to say, here's the experience of how young people of color, that's 99% of our student population, are experiencing your workforce, and that's got to be part of this conversation. Otherwise, we won't diversify the pipeline, and the quality jobs won't be meaningful for the young people who most deserve them.
Thank you for bringing that in. Yael, last brief word to you.
Yeah, I'll second that, and also say many of the great majority of grocery owners are white-owned. But there is some great examples out there of grocery stores owned by people of color. We have to do better when it comes to racism in the workforce at grocery stores. But through healthy food financing, we're able to support more and more grocers of color, and this is something that we have to do better at, and this is something that we're working on into the future.
I think Maureen's going to wrap us up here, but I want to thank you all for your thoughts. It takes an ecosystem, lots of issues at play here that are all interrelated. It's great to have this ecosystem of direct service providers, of training, of new service models, and of course the old standards that are doing it right. Thanks to you all, and remember to support each of these organizations in your own way. Maureen, thank you for having us.
And I'm grateful for Eric's appreciation of how we structure our panels. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for a really fabulous conversation on and giving a strong finish on the equity issue, which is so important in food retail and in jobs in general. This is our last event in our Working in America series in 2018, but please come back in 2019 when we will have more to talk about working in America. So thank you again.